After a long day, I was resting in bed, my eyes being unable to remain open due to exhaustion. The ceiling fan's faint hum was the only sound emanating from the residence. I was in the process of falling asleep when I felt a gentle contact on my arm. I felt my body growing rigid. At first, I believed that I was imagining it, as the lingering sensation of half-sleep was playing a deception on my mind. I then felt it again, a gentle slight pressure. I experienced a momentary heartbeat. My firstborn. It was inevitable that it was him. However, what was the reason for his arrival in the midst of the night? My mind was whirling with potential solutions. Was he frightened? Did he experience a nightmare? I inclined my head slightly, anticipating the sight of his diminutive figure standing beside my bed. However, there was no such entity. I felt a shiver down my spine. The room was dimly illuminated by the street lamp's radiance, which cast lengthy shadows across the walls. I slowly sat up, scanning the room for any movement, my breath trapped in my throat. It is possible that he had fled to his room prior to my arrival. It is possible that I had simply imagined it. Subsequently, I detected an audible disturbance as I prepared to resume my position. A faint whisper, so silent that I nearly missed it. It was not emanating from the hallway or the doorway. It was immediately adjacent to me. My pulse was pounding as I abruptly turned, but the area adjacent to my bed was devoid of any objects. As I reached for the bedside lamp, my fingers trembled slightly and my palms were cold. I was compelled to observe. I was compelled to ascertain the circumstances. However, as my fingertips approached the switch, something grasped my wrist. The unexpected grip caused my wrist to stiffen, and my breath was trapped in my throat. It was firm enough to send a frigid shiver through my entire body, despite not being tight. I instinctively yanked my palm back and frantically attempted to activate the lamp. The room was illuminated by a warm glow, which dispelled the ominous darkness. As I examined the vacant area adjacent to me, my pulse beat rapidly. Nothing existed. There is no movement. There was no indication of any presence. I exhaled a trembling breath, attempting to persuade myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination. Maybe I was simply fatigued and my mind was playing a prank on me. However, the sensation of that grip continued to linger on my epidermis, as genuine as any other sensation I had experienced. The bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, caught my attention. If my son had been present, he could have fled before I illuminated the room. However, something seemed amiss. Not in use. I slid out of bed, my bare feet pressing against the frigid floor after taking a deep breath. I approached the doorway and gazed into the hallway, which was dimly illuminated. All was at a standstill. The living room clock's faint ticking was the only sound emanating from the residence. I hesitated briefly before exiting the building and proceeding to my son's bedroom. His door was shut. My heart was hammering as I gently turned the knob and pushed it open. He was lying in bed, completely asleep. His soft breathing was steady and serene as he curled under the blanket, his diminutive frame. He had not relocated. He had not been in my room. After gazing at him for a moment, I experienced a sensation of both relief and confusion. How could he be fast asleep if he had been in my chamber just moments ago? And if it was not him, who or what had impacted me? As I stepped back, a chilling sensation enveloped me, and my mind was in a state of agitation as it sought a logical explanation. However, before I could persuade myself that it was all a figment of my imagination, an event transpired that caused my blood to freeze. The closet door in my son's room was marginally ajar, and I was certain that it had never been that way before. I stood transfixed, gazing at the slightly open closet door as a wave of unease settled over me. Consistent and uninterrupted, my son's gentle respiration filled the silence. Despite the increasing tension in the room, he was oblivious to it, as he was deeply asleep. I forcefully swallowed, my mind in a state of agitation. Had he left the door unlocked prior to retiring for the evening? Or had it been opened by someone or something after he had fallen asleep? I cautiously advanced, my heart pounding in my ears. I halted, clutching my breath as the floor groaned under my weight. I slowly reached for the closet door, feeling the cold on my hands as I prepared to thrust it open and alleviate my apprehensions. However, a faint noise reverberated from within as my fingertips brushed against the wood. A whisper that was too faint to discern any words, yet distinct enough to immobilize me. My body was tense and every nerve was on alert. I desired to believe that it was a mere illusion, a mental trick, or a draft that was traveling through the house. However, in my heart, I was aware that something was amiss. My initial reaction was to take my son and exit the room. However, I hesitated. I would awaken him and frighten him if I became agitated. And I would feel ridiculous if I was mistaken, if this was simply the result of my fatigued mind concocting stories. I compelled myself to exhale and press my palm firmly against the door. It would conclude with a single forceful thrust. I mentally tallied the number. 1, 2, 3. The door was forced open by me. There was no one in the wardrobe. Shoes were arranged on the floor, and clothes were carefully hung in their designated locations. There was nothing unusual about the situation. I slowly exhaled, allowing my shoulders to unwind. It is possible that I had responded excessively. It is possible that the murmur originated from the exterior or from the vents. That was the only option. I was on the brink of turning away when an object captured my attention. The hanging garments swayed slightly as if something had just touched them. I felt a shiver down my spine. The air in the closet was colder and denser than that of the rest of the room. And then in the dim light, I observed something that caused my stomach to plummet. A small gap in the wall was present at the very rear of the closet, behind the hanging clothes. A void that had never existed before. As I gazed at the small crevice in the back of the closet, a chill traversed my spine. It was scarcely discernible, concealed by the hanging garments. However, upon noting it, I was unable to turn my gaze aside. My respiration became shallow and my pulse increased. I was certain that the chasm had never existed before. However, the longer I gazed at it, the more disquieting it became. I hesitated, my mind rushing with potential solutions. It is possible that the issue was merely a loose panel or a crack in the structure of the ancient house. However, why did it appear to be so deliberate? I forced myself to swallow forcefully and proceeded at a leisurely pace. As I reached out and pushed the clothing aside, the closet appeared to contract around me, despite its already diminutive size. The air was viscous and emitted an unusual dampness that had not been present just moments ago. With my fingertips, I traced the gap's perimeter. The wood had a rough, irregular texture. It was not merely a fissure, it was an opening. I applied pressure to it, and to my horror, it slightly bowed and shifted under my contact. My heart pounded. A concealed area? A crawl space? The notion caused my stomach to contract. What was the duration of its presence? Also, more significantly, had it been utilized by someone? I froze as a result of an indistinct rustling sound. It emerged from the darkness within, beyond the divide. Every fiber of my being begged me to retreat, to close the closet, and to claim that I had never witnessed it. However, I was unable to do so. Not without knowledge. Not while my son was asleep, which was only a few feet away. I turned to observe him, who was still undisturbed, his diminutive figure coiled beneath the blankets. He was unaware of the events that were unfolding mere feet from him. My protective instincts were activated. I was compelled to ascertain whether there was an individual or object concealed in that area. I reached for my phone and activated the flashlight. The beam penetrated the darkness, illuminating the rough wooden borders of the concealed area. I gradually widened the distance. The sound of the wood creaking sent a chill down my spine. The area behind it was exceedingly narrow, with scarcely enough room for an individual to pass through. The movement caused dust to drift in the air. A short, dark tunnel that led deeper into the wall was disclosed by my flashlight. My epidermis pricked as I held my breath. Who constructed this? What is the reason for this? In an attempt to obtain a more comprehensive view, I stooped slightly. My stomach dropped as my flashlight traced the narrow passage, despite the fact that the tunnel appeared to come to an end just a few feet in. The floor was adorned with faint scuff marks as if something had been dragged through. Subsequently, my respiration became obstructed as I directed the light further. Something was present at the tunnel's far end. A faint movement in the shadows. An abrupt creak reverberated from behind me. I experienced a chill in my body. It had not originated from the tunnel. It had originated from within the chamber. As the sound reverberated throughout the room, my entire body contracted. It was not emanating from the tunnel. It was approaching from behind me. I slowly turned my head, my pulse pounding in my ears. My son continues to remain motionless in his bed, his respiration remaining gentle and uninterrupted. However, the door to his chamber, which I had previously left slightly ajar, was now closed. I forced myself to swallow forcefully in an effort to calm my anxiety. Had a manuscript been created? Had the air shifted just enough to seal the door? But I had a strong sense in my intuition that this was not the case. I scanned the room, looking for any indication that I was not alone or any movement. The weight of the unknown suffocated me as the closet's darkness enveloped me. Then, an additional sound was heard. This time it was gentler, nearly imperceptible. A shuffling sound emanating from the opposite side of the room in close proximity to my son's workstation. My respiration was temporarily interrupted. Prior to entering the chamber, I conducted an inspection. Nothing had been present. However, the shadows in the vicinity of the desk appeared to be darker and heavier in the faint light of my flashlight. My heart slammed against my ribcage as I took a hesitant step forward. A brief moment of movement. I abruptly ceased. Something was positioned beneath the counter. The form was diminutive, yet it was unmistakably human. As I resisted the impulse to flee, my larynx became parched. The outline was scarcely discernible, with the knees pulled up, the arms wrapped around them, and the face buried in the shadows. And then, just as I was persuaded that I was seeing things, it moved once more. A deliberate, sluggish movement, as if the individual or entity concealed there was aware that I had observed them. I was constrained by two impossibly difficult decisions. The tunnel that leads into the unknown is situated behind me. Something or someone is present in my immediate vicinity, mere feet from my sleeping infant. I compelled myself to advance by securing the flashlight in my hand. Who is present? My voice was scarcely audible as I whispered. There was no response. I could hear my own respiration, which was shallow and irregular. I approached the figure with caution, directing the flashlight beam toward it. They responded immediately upon the light's arrival. An abrupt, sharp movement that is excessively rapid and unnatural. The figure scurried rearward, pressing itself against the wall, causing my breath to catch. It was a youngster. However, my son is not included. I was on the brink of cardiac arrest. I found it difficult to comprehend the images I was observing. The child, who was no older than 6 or 7, was pale and had wide, terrified eyes that shone faintly in the low light. Their hair was untidy, and their clothing was soiled. However, what is the most distressing aspect? The appearance of their visage was uncannily similar. The realization struck me like a tidal wave, and my legs nearly buckled. My son bore an uncanny resemblance to this infant. The same small nose, the same round cheekbones. However, there was an anomaly. Their expression was too vacant, and their eyes were excessively lifeless. Immediately, the child murmured a single word that sent ice through my veins just as I opened my mouth to speak. Run. I held the dirt-stained paper in my trembling palms, and a shiver ran down my spine. My thoughts were agitated as I endeavored to comprehend the events that had transpired. The infant. The tunnel's shadow. A murmur. This time, you rescued him. However, the matter is not yet concluded. What was the significance of this? My son was still soundly asleep, blissfully unaware of the terrifying event that had just transpired in his bedroom. I compelled myself to think logically by taking a deep inhalation. It is feasible that I was experiencing hallucinations. Perhaps I had succumbed to lethargy. However, I was aware that this was not the case. The tunnel's presence was palpable and everything appeared to be too real. I was unable to articulate it. I returned to the closet, summoning every ounce of fortitude I could muster. A peculiar pressure persisted in the atmosphere, despite the fact that the door was closed. I was aware that I needed to verify this information. I slowly groped for the handle, my heart pounding in my ears. I quickly pulled the door open with a swift motion. The wardrobe was once again a mere closet, containing storage boxes, shoes, and clothing. There is no culvert. There was no indication that anything had ever been present. My mind was inundated with a sudden wave of perplexity. Had it all been a hallucination? Is it a dream? The rough texture of the note brought me back to reality as my fingertips tightened around it. No, an event had transpired in this location. Something that is genuine. A low whisper touched my ear just as I was about to retreat away. A voice, unmistakable despite its slightness, refrained from reopening it. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but no one was present. The room was devoid of movement. In his slumber, my son released a gentle sigh as he stirred slightly. Everything was as it should be. However, I was unable to escape the sensation that I had just come into contact with something that I was never intended to discover. I slid the note into my pocket and turned off the light with shaky hands. As I exited the room, I cast one final glance at my son, who appeared tranquil and secure. This evening, I was unaware of the events that transpired. However, one thing was evident. I was not going to disregard it, because I was aware that this was not the end deep down. Not yet. And perhaps it would never be. I devoted the subsequent days to persuading myself that the entire situation was a figment of my imagination. It is possible that I was overtired, that my imagination had taken over, or that I had been dreaming while awake. However, I was unable to dismiss the sight I had witnessed, despite my efforts to rationalize it. The tunnel. The infant. The individual who bore an overwhelming resemblance to me. Additionally, the note is of paramount importance. I concealed it in my nightstand, carefully folded as if it were a standard piece of paper. However, I experienced an unusual sense of unease whenever I groped for an object in close proximity to it. I had read it repeatedly in the hopes that the words would become more comprehensible, but they never did. This time you rescued him. However, the matter is not yet concluded. I was aware that I had to forward, despite the persistent dread. I ensured that my son never slept with the closet door open again, and I maintained a vigilant watch over him. I even entertained the possibility of securing it. However, I was aware that a basic door would not deter whatever had been inside if it desired to return. Days transformed into weeks, and life eventually returned to its usual state. My son was content, oblivious to the events that transpired that evening. I elected not to inform him. It was futile to frighten him over an issue that I was unable to comprehend. However, I continued to exercise caution as time progressed. Strange sounds at night were never disregarded by me. I never disregarded the occasional shivers that would creep up my spine. Moreover, I never forgot the manner in which that figure had gazed at me, as if it recognized me. One night, as I was preparing to put my son to bed, he lifted his head and beamed at me with sleepy eyes. "Daddy, you no longer need to be apprehensive," he whispered. I was unable to exhale. I inquired with great concern as to what I was apprehensive about. The individual who was concealed, he stated plainly. He has departed at this time. I suppressed a smile, kissed his forehead, and turned off the light. However, I could not shake the sensation that he was mistaken as I stood in the doorway, watching him drift off to slumber. It is possible that the individual who was hiding in the closet had disappeared. However, I had a sense that this was not quite the end. No, it would never occur. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.